The National Museum of Funeral History presents The Final Curtain Never Closes. I'm your host, Genevieve Keeney Vasquez, the president and CEO of the museum. Today, I am honored to be joined by a fascinating guest and a really dear friend of mine, Mike McKenna, who's the Director of Recycling and Development with Core Scientific. Good morning, Mike. How are you?
Good morning, Genevieve. I'm great. Great to be here with you. And doing well. Thank you.
I have to tell you, when I was a kid, I would go pop can collecting so that I could recycle the pop cans to get money for candy. It's just what we did. But to me, that's all I've ever known about recycling is collecting your pop cans, putting them in a trash bag, taking them down to the recycle center and get you some change, right, for your pocket. And I didn't know there was a larger scope to recycling outside of that. However, as I got older, we recycle a lot of stuff now. I mean, it's kind of like a green movement in our society, but a lot of it is paper, like I said, pop cans, your cell phones, electronics. But you bring recycling to a whole new concept that truthfully I didn't even know existed until I joined the industry.
I know. And it's fascinating. And thank you, Genevieve. So yeah, pop can collection. We also did a lot of beer can collections, by the way.
Oh,
and,
I was too young to drink at the time, but yeah.
We weren't drinking, but as far as collecting those,
yeah.
You really raise a good question or a good point as far as recycling is concerned. There's a phrase that's used called circular economy. And basically, those cans were made, those pop cans were manufactured, the metal was mined. There was a great deal of resources, as you know, to manufacture and really create those pop cans. And so the concept of recycling or a cycle or a circular economy is keeping it within our economy. And you did exactly that. There was a resource there for you to take those pop cans to, and there was an incentive as well, right? I mean, it was fun. And we understand that, we understand that the way that transaction takes place is something that people really are accustomed to. And I think that's a great opener to this conversation.
Yeah, you mentioned resource. You definitely have to have the resources set up for people to be able to recycle, correct? I mean, to be able to give those items back to, and you guys are that source, right, at Core Scientific. You're the resource for people to deliver those materials that need to be recycled. But basically, who is your clientele that utilizes you as a source?
Yeah, so Core Scientific, just to give you a little background on who we are and really how we developed our program, we really started outside of the funeral profession years ago, prior to working with funeral professionals, working with manufacturers, working with medical companies. They would have an abundance of scrap metal, essentially. And rather than discarding it, there is a value to this metal, both an ethical value, and a conservational value, and a monetary value. So there's a responsibility there. So Core Scientific was very well established working with these other professions outside of the funeral profession. What ended up happening was my background, actually, how I got into this whole process. Years ago, I worked with funeral professionals in a completely different area. Genevieve. I produced and I wrote public service announcements on radio for years. And I worked with funeral professionals. I like to say that if you were listening to a really bad commercial at about 2 a.m., I might have written that if you were listening to the radio around 2000, 2005. So I had a lot of experience just working with funeral professionals. I produced a lot of commercials for funeral professionals. What ended up happening was there was an opportunity with Core Scientific to develop a program within the funeral profession. And this was a great opportunity because professionalizing recycling was just taking off at that time. And there's a whole little bit of history about what had been going on prior to that and where we are today. But essentially, to answer your question, I work with crematoriums. And we provide a recycling program where we train operators, we provide tools, we provide equipment, support, information, shipping. We provide logistics for those metals to arrive at our refinery. We are a refinery where we assay the metals, we test the metals, we report on the metals, and we have steps and procedures to really find out, okay, well, what are we looking at? What kind of metals are we looking at? So in short, working with crematoriums.
So for people that don't know the cremation process and or the metals that we're referring to when you're talking about the crematories, people might be thinking, oh, well, maybe you're taking an old broken down crematorium machine and recycling that. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're actually talking about the metals that come out of the bodies once they've been cremated, correct?
Exactly. So the types of metals that we are describing are implants. These metals, anatomical implants, both for the entire body, along with other metals that might have come along with a cardboard casket, for example. A tremendous amount of staples. After the cremation itself, there's a stage where the operator is then processing the remains, and there's a step and procedure to make sure that all of the metals are being separated. So the type of metals that we're talking about could be a hip, it could be a knee. These metals are made of titanium. These metals are made of cobalt. Also dental implants, which have precious metals. And so the operator has to make sure that after the cremation itself, they have to take a very careful amount of time to make sure that these metals are being carefully separated from the remains. And they then go ahead and containerize those metals. And then we have the remains themselves that are placed in an urn respectfully, ethically. And the benefit to that is that the family can really have a moment of clarity, of respect, of dignity with their loved ones' remains without having the extra component of metals within the urn. So there's really a twofold benefit to this: the recycling itself, but also paying very close attention to make sure that the remains are very clean and consistent in their nature.
And also, we have to remove those metals because part of the process of the remains of the deceased loved ones, if the metals are present within those cremated remains, they also can harm the machinery that we use in order to further pulverize the ashes, correct? Or pulverize the bones, which reduces them to the ash that we are all familiar with seeing, correct?
Correct, absolutely. So after the cremation itself, the operator then removes the remains from the retort, which is the machine that is providing the cremation to the decedent. So the remains are then removed and they're cooled in a tray. At that point, there is a step in which larger metals, titanium rods, hips, all the joints, all the visible metals can be removed from the remains. And then also, so those metals, many of those are non-magnetic, but many of the metals, the staples that I mentioned, for example, that are not part of the anatomical implants, but are part of the casket itself, those are magnetic. So what ends up happening is the operator, Genevieve, will take a large magnet that has a weight to it, and they can begin to break down the remains of the decedent with that magnet. It's very heavy, so essentially breaking down the remains. And at the same time, that magnet is removing all of the magnetic metals. Again, not all the metals are magnetic, so many of those metals need to be removed visibly and by hand. At that point, you're absolutely correct. Those larger metals need to be removed prior to basically pulverizing the remains themselves, so they can be broken down into a very fine nature and placed into the urn. And so those larger metals are removed. You're absolutely correct. And then once the metals are placed into this what's essentially a large processor with blades that will break down the remains. There are a couple of different types of processors. One that is essentially just a very large pail with a blade on the bottom of it that is breaking the remains down. At that point, after the pulverization, there's normally a second step in which some of the smaller metals that weren't detected, either were non-magnetic or not visible, are then screened out by hand. So that's one type of processor where there's another step that has taken place to make sure that all the metals are being removed and captured. And there's another type of machinery, processor, in which automatically the metals themselves are being screened out. So essentially what happens is you have that same technology of pulverizing the remains, but there's a screen in which the remains are falling and those smaller metal fragments, okay, are being caught on that screen. What's interesting about that second processor, and we can talk a little bit about the development of all of this, processors are being developed more and more because recycling is becoming more and more of a mainstream process at crematoriums.
Oh, so I didn't realize it was becoming so mainstream, which I think is a wonderful concept. So yeah, so after you've collected those metals, I guess I have an interesting question. Has any family members requested any implants or parts of their loved ones to be returned? And if so, what types of requests are they?
That's a great question, and it does happen. And this is where our funeral professionals and the families, they really need to work together. I've seen it across the board where, and I get it, I understand that. We understand that what we're looking at is collecting metals over a long period of time. So if an individual, for maybe sentimental reasons, wants to have, dad's hip replacement, that's something that they, that is important to them. It's a very personal, request, and I know that funeral professionals deal with that on a case-by-case basis. I know that sometimes it can be a little bit tricky for a funeral professional to promise that, because during the cremation process itself, during the processing of the remains, there's a lot of moving parts going on. So we need to be, very particular about that. So there are funeral professionals that have standards that say that's not part of our protocol. Once you have authorized the funeral professional to go ahead and perform the cremation itself, that really our policy is for, our responsibility is to make sure that all the metals that were captured during that cremation, we can't legally release that. But then again, we do have funeral professionals where there's a little bit of a difference in nature. So I would say for the most part, there's a sentimental aspect to it. But then also there are individuals, there are families that say, well, there's some monetary value here. And we know that mom or dad would want us to have that, whatever kind of implant it was, we want that back. And I know that, again, that's the responsibility of the funeral professional to go ahead and work through whatever kind of standards they have, Genevieve.
And usually when you talk about the monetary, you're pretty much referring to maybe, the fillings in the teeth, pretty much?
Well, yeah, I definitely, in terms of the level of value, you find that a lot of the value, the higher value is definitely coming from the dental implants and other dental metals that are being collected. But also keep in mind that the hips and the rods and the other anatomical metals, they also do have a value. And what we're looking at is an accumulation over a long period of time. There are some crematories that are very large that accumulate a high degree of metal in a short period of time. They could perhaps have 1 to 200 pounds of metals within a month's period. And then you have some crematoriums that are much smaller, and it may take 5 years to be able to collect that amount of metal. And there are a couple of areas that are feeding into that level. One would be, was the individual of an age in which they needed the surgical implants? On average, most individuals that need these surgical implants tend to be a little bit older. So if you're in a particular area where there are more older individuals that were fortunate enough, and I think it's really important to mention that this is a very recent historical development that we're able to utilize these implants, and they've helped millions of people. And there's a very interesting history about implants that we can discuss as well. But to answer your question, definitely there are different demographics that are coming into play and different areas that will cause a higher level of metals to be collected.
And you were talking about the history of the medical implants. Do you ever find where, because the implants, maybe not so much now, but maybe before, when they started utilizing more implants on medical procedures to extend the quality of life of people, did you get a lot of requests for some of these implants to be returned for medical studies to see how they performed or how they held up on wear and tear?
Interestingly enough, it's the connection between the manufacturer of the implants and really by the time they're being recycled, there has been, at least in our experience, a very minimum amount of research done between both of these parties. What we do with the metals essentially is what we are. We are that circular economy. We are testing the metals to really find out, okay, what are we looking at so we can provide a report and a value of the metals back to the crematorium, number one. And at that point, the metals are further processed and they are being used again. So a nice way of thinking about it is a titanium hip, for example, or a titanium rod. That same titanium that a grandmother was fortunate enough to use to make her life better, after she's done using that particular implant, it's going to be recycled and reprocessed into a bike made of titanium for someone's grandchild. And so
I thought that you were going to say that that it was going to stay a hip implant and be utilized for somebody else. And I was going to ask you, does it get melted down? But you answered that question and said it goes from being a hip to perhaps being a bike. So it's safe to say that everything that gets recycled is not recycled for its same function that it once was. It is all recycled for something different.
Absolutely.
That's interesting. I would have never thought that a hip at one time could become a bike. That's a very interesting concept. When you put it into perspective like that, I don't think people realize, well, one, what things used to be or perhaps was at one time, but the cycle is now being you're bringing the recycling, the repurposing into a wonderful perception that I myself didn't even think of. So I'm pretty sure that the listeners are finding it quite interesting and wanting to know that perhaps was their bike at one time a hip replacement. I think that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I think both on a scientific perspective, but also really from a cultural or ethical perspective as well, that these metals are also finding their way back home so they can go ahead and be reused. The amount of energy, when we look at conservation, we look at three areas. One would be the air, two would be land, three would be water. And all three of these areas, when it comes to mining and manufacturing, it does have a conservation cost. It takes a great deal of air, land, and water, just in general, to produce these metals. So that's already been spent.
Mm-hmm.
So by keeping them in a circular economy, we are offsetting the need to go back into air, land, and water to go ahead and use that. It's clearly responsible. But what's also interesting about this is that crematoriums also they use air, land, and water.
Correct.
So they're also using these resources. And when they are responsibly collecting the metals and recycling them, they're offsetting. So it's about balance. It's about really being able to recognize the balance. And you mentioned history. If I can jump into that.
Yes, please.
Interestingly enough, and one thing I love about National Museum of Funeral History is obviously we're talking about, okay, well, where are we? Where were we? Where are we now? And potentially where are we going? And let's study how we got here. And so this is a little bit of a fascinating, and I know at the National Museum of Funeral History, I love the cremation exhibit, and you definitely go into this. So it's something that very educational. So for thousands of years, humans have been using materials when it comes to prosthetics. Materials, I mean, the most famous few hundred years ago would be George Washington with wooden teeth, for example. That's a prosthetic. Actually, ivory was used for dental implants. But even going further back, we have in the fossil record, we have going back thousands of years that humans were using implants such as seashells for dental implants, and ivory and wood. And the Egyptians used, in mummification, we find that wood was used to replace toes, a big toe, for example. So humans have been really on top of the game when it comes to let's try to help one another and heal one another. It's a great part of our story.
It's just interesting the different types of materials that they actually use to try to recreate a pen, one of our fingers or toes. Isn't
it? Yeah.
Pretty fascinating. I never would have thought wood. That's a concept I did not know about George Washington. But fascinating history trivia nonetheless.
Absolutely. And so these materials, they've been used for thousands of years. It really is. It's fascinating. And what ends up happening is starting in the 19th century, we start to see gold and silver being used. 19th century, we've got, development of technology big time, as we know, the 1800s, things are the Industrial Revolution. So you've got a lot of development here, both in technology and also when it comes to medical. And so those start to come together in terms of dental implants, surgical implants. You start to see just the very basics when it comes to implants and surgery. But really, when things start to pick up big time is right around 1960. There were some big pioneers when it came to surgical implants. It's a wonderful study. I suggest if anyone's interested in it, there's a lot of interesting history when it comes to implants and how it began to help millions. So from the 1950s, 1960s, you start to see more and more implants, and if you remember, Genevieve, maybe about 10, 20 years ago, you started to hear more and more people getting surgical implants. This is just a very recent type of phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a recipient of dental implants, so I totally get it. I understand. I mean, my daughter was the first one in our family to receive implants at a young age because she wasn't born with her canine teeth. They just never developed. So at such a young age, their image is frowned upon by unfortunately their peers. For us, it was something that we felt was important, not only for her function and the development of her teeth as they grew in. It was important for her aesthetics as far as her peers not making fun of her, and so we did. We had dental implants, and she's got them for life, and they've totally transformed, like you say, made a huge difference on the development of her teeth, her bite, her ability to digest food, but at the same time gave her that appearance that kept her from being looked at as being different.
So awesome. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And so individuals that have access to this newer technology, again, developing, and what ends up happening is what I like to think of is sort of you've got three really major confluences of development happening here. One would be more and more implants are being used. You've got an aging population because medical breakthroughs, or people are living longer, they're getting more and more implants. And at the same time, cremation, as you well know, is really beginning to take off from the 1980s, 1990s on to what we have today, where based on the research in the United States, the majority of people are selecting cremation over burial.
And let me just clarify quickly. So if someone is buried, then obviously the implants will just stay with them for an eternity. So the only time we really do retrieve any of the implants that these people receive is during the cremation process, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And then also we do have, of course, there are NOR, natural organic reduction, which isn't technically cremation, but is more of a organic type of disposition, where you have the individual, the decedent, naturally through natural organic materials helping to break down body tissue, where all you have left would be the bone and metal. So that would be one other area that would technically be outside of cremation.
And that's a new form of disposition that's just starting to enter into the profession. Is that correct?
Very new.
And what's it called again?
Natural organic reduction, NOR.
NOR, natural organic reduction. Very interesting concept. But yeah, so are you guys partaking in the recycling of that process as well? Wow.
Area, individuals that more and more people are looking at different ways in terms of disposition, and this is definitely along with water cremation. This would be one of the newer dispositions, natural organic reduction. In a larger picture, you can think of it similar to, with all respect, the concept of composting, where you allow the environment to break down the tissue of the body, and it does take time, and then you have a professional that is then removing the bone itself and the metals. And yes, we do receive the metals from those companies, those organizations that offer that type of disposition.
So where is that type of disposition currently being offered? Do you know the spread of that concept nationwide, or is it still like very much like the water cremation where it's still very localized and not widespread yet?
I would say that it's definitely localized and not widespread. So there are particular states, Washington State, for example, I know is a state that is it's in wider use. Colorado is another state where it is in more wider use. There are other states in which they've gone ahead and they have approved this type of disposition, but it's not in the same type of use. In other words, the steps have been taken to go ahead and approve it, but this is just beginning to really develop. So we are at the very entry point in this type of disposition. And so we're watching that closely, and we're working with those companies, and it's a very interesting development as well over the last few years.
Well, you brought this concept to me. I'm just now all of a sudden I have all these questions. I'm just so curious. So the natural organic reduction, instead of using fire to reduce the body down to its bones, or water to reduce the body down to its bones, now we're using organic compounds to reduce the body down to its bones. Then do you, just like with fire and water, do you also retrieve these bones and then pulverize them also down into an ash form?
Yeah, there's a different type, and with all due respect to that technology, that's something that each company has developed their own type of process. But yes, there is that same type of retrieval of the bones, and then the family, they are returned to the family itself so they can go ahead and respect and honor them.
Okay.
And then at the same time, they're able to retrieve those metals, and we're able to get those metals back into the circular economy.
Gosh, very interesting. The developments that we are making in our industry and finding all different types of ways to, basically, take care of the human bodies once they have passed away, but do it in a very dignified way that is both culturally and environmentally accepted and or friendly.
Absolutely.
That. It makes me wonder what's around the corner. What are we going to come up with in 10 years, right? With this position. Wow.
Amazing. It is
amazing. That is truly amazing. And then the fact that, we're able to, once again, kind of like, just like we do with the bodies, right? Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We're taking these metals and recycling them into something that we can still use day over day. And I heard that they actually use some of these parts in cell phones. Is that correct?
Oh yeah. These, especially electronics. These metals are going back into computers. They're going back into, to really look at it from a nice perspective. The same metals that were used to help out mom or grandma or grandpa, these metals are then being retrieved. And those same metals may be used in a satellite. They may be used in an airplane. And so that type of conversation that we're having right now, Genevieve, it's really amazing when I'm able to talk with an operator, a crematorium operator, or I'm able to talk with an owner or a manager. And I do want to touch on that as well, because the funeral professionals, with these three major developments, people are living longer, surgical implants are more of an option, and the cremation rate is going up. By around 2010, 2015, very recently, last 10, 15 years, crematoriums just recently are really asking themselves, okay, well, what can we do professionally? What can we do ethically here to make sure that we're being responsible? What ended up happening was, as the cremation rate went up and the amount of implants also started to increase, crematoriums were left with an abundance of metals, and many of them did not know what to do with it. And so what did we used to do with it years ago? Everybody used to just, basically discard it.
Yeah.
Discard it, and then that was the responsible thing to do. It was, considered refuse, and it would go to the landfill. And that's what we did for years. That's what we knew. And so what ends up happening, just like at home and office, recycling became more of a mainstream opportunity. And so what you begin to see happen is more and more crematoriums start to look at developing a recycling program. And so that has developed tremendously over the last 10 years, particularly over the last 10 years.
And when you actually see what this recycling program becomes, like the big picture, just like you said, it goes back into the airplane, the electronics, the things that we use every day. It's truly amazing to see the cycle of life in that concept.
Yes, it really is. It really is. And what's very important also is that when we're talking with operators at a crematorium and a manager, we're very much reminding them of the good work that they are doing and the importance that they are doing. Statistically, 1 ounce of precious metals, for example, conserves close to 1,400 gallons of fresh water. Just 1 ounce. The idea of the average crematorium recycling, the amount of air, land, and water that are conserved, the calculations that are there. And we share those calculations with operators, because when you look at, wow, how much is 1,300 gallons of water? And we're able to really get people excited about the conservation area. There's also one other important incentive that the vast majority of any value of these metals are being donated to charities. And so that's an aspect of this. That responsibility then continues. And so we have some incredible programs. We work with funeral professionals that have multiple crematories around North America. And they will go ahead and select different charities from around the country. And they will involve managers at the crematorium. They'll involve operators and say, hey, we'd like to get your input on a local charity, churches, nonprofits, medical centers that are receiving the value of these metals as well, Genevieve. It's really just awesome.
So it's yet another ring to that circle of giving back and keeping it moving forward. So you're saying that when a crematory donates or turns in their metals to you and they receive that monetary return on the metals that they have given you, then they take that money and they give it to charity to continue helping more people. So
very important.
It's such an amazing concept that I think that people don't realize that it's much bigger than just a recycling.
Absolutely.
Wow. That's truly amazing. I mean, the fact that they give it back is I think, an even bigger concept that I was not aware of. I did not know that they gave the money back to charities to help out. So to think that grandma who had a hip replacement that helped her gain a more quality of life after she has passed away, that one hip replacement is continuing to give back. Not only in its metal form, but also in its monetary value. That's truly amazing.
It really is. And it aligns with the business ethics, the cultural ethics that right away, right from the very beginning, when we work with the crematorium, it's okay. 100% of all this is going to a charity. We want all the funds directly going to that charity itself. And it's really amazing to see this happening. And working with funeral professionals, this is really all about our profession, Genevieve. This is all about this newness, this new development of recycling, and funeral professionals saying, okay, yes, I want to do the responsible thing. I want to make sure that we're separating out the metals from the remains. And again, that positive influence on not just the recycling, but also on the remains, that more and more care has been taken over the last decade to make sure that any visible metals are being removed again. So that very solemn, dignified moment that a family member has with their loved one while looking inside that urn, that there are no foreign objects and that they can have that very special opportunity to be with one another. It's really remarkable how this has helped the profession.
Yeah, it truly is. I mean, I after this conversation, actually, my mind is blown away because I just when I think I know it all, right? I'm in the profession myself. I'm exposed to it on a daily basis. I run the National Museum of Funeral History. I think that I have captured every concept there is when I'm curating the exhibit. And here I sit with you, and this is just a testament to us being able to have these amazing podcasts where we take the education of a concept and take it to the next level, because I've truly learned a lot of stuff here that I could not have learned just when I curated the exhibit. It's truly amazing. I didn't realize that I was aware that the metals turned into everyday use items, especially the electronics. I was keenly aware of that. But however, other items of use and or the whole concept of giving back, I did not know that. And I think that's truly, I think, the most valuable concept in this whole talk that we've had today is how we continue to give back and do the best we can for, for everybody who has lost a loved one, but at the same time do the best we can for our future generations. It's so important.
It's so important. And it really, I think, not only helps us as a society, but really the individuals that are on the front lines, our funeral professionals, that there's a responsible way to handle these metals. And again, exactly what you had said, Genevieve, that there are positive outlets here. And the operators that I talk to are really just so enthusiastic and encouraged by the amount of work they do, because this is really the work of the operator. And the crematorium operator they are remarkable individuals. I work with them every day. I visit their locations. I talk with them. And the crematorium operators, the care, the diligence that they take I cannot say enough. And I've been working with them for the last decade. And it's just such a close relationship that I have with them, that they're the ones that are doing the work to make sure that these metals are containerized and shipped to Core Scientific so we can then go ahead and take it from there.
And I'm so honored to have you today as our guest and help us shed light on the fact that when our loved ones pass away and the parts that we hold dear to them that once made up who they were will continue to live on and make a difference in our future. So thank you again, Mike, for everything that you do for our industry, for the loved ones, and for those who unfortunately pass away, to ensure that everything is done in the most dignified way. I greatly appreciate that.
Thank you, Genevieve, for allowing me to be on your program, your podcast. It was great.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me today on this podcast, and I hope that you will share this episode with family and friends. We look forward to any feedback you have to offer by giving us a review on Apple or Spotify. And always remember, any day above ground is a good one.